In this video, I'm going to show you how to transform 3 common cooking mistakes in order to save your meal. Hi, I'm Kristen Tand with In the Kitchen with Kristen, where I share tips and tricks with you about how to slow down your life through kitchen confidence. How many times have you tried cooking a meal and with one little whoops, you add a little too much of something and then you feel like you gotta throw the whole meal out? Mistakes happen, and they will always happen. But what I want to share with you today is how you can pivot that mistake in order to transform that meal into something that's still delicious. And be sure to stay till the end of the video where I'm going to share some links for some easy weeknight meals. All right, let's get started. So the first mistake that is really common is making something too salty. So I'm sure this has happened to you where a recipe calls for maybe a teaspoon of salt and you accidentally put in a tablespoon. It totally happens to all of us. So here are a couple ideas of what you can do in order to make that less salty. If you're cooking a soup or a sauce and you've added too much salt in, the first thing you can do is double that recipe. So if that recipe called for 2 cups of broth, double it to 4 cups of broth, but leave the salt as is. You're then diluting that salt inside of the broth and it's gonna make it less salty. The second tip with that is add more of what's in that soup or that sauce. So if you have vegetables in there like potatoes, broccoli, carrots, go ahead and put more broccoli, carrots, and onions in there, and that's gonna absorb some of that saltiness and make it less salty. And then my third tip for saltiness, if you're making a soup, is add a potato if it makes sense. So potatoes are really starchy vegetables and they will absorb a ton of that salt. So take a potato, it can be any kind, like a russet or a yellow potato, red potato, cut it into some cubes and then add that to your sauce or your soup and give it some time, let it cook down, and it's gonna pull some of that saltiness out of it and make it taste less salty. Okay, so now let's talk about the second common mistake, which is making something too watery. So say you were trying to water down your soup because it's too salty, and now you've gone too far and it's too bland and too watery. The first thing that you can do is just cook it longer. That water will evaporate as you cook it, and that water will evaporate off and will bring it back to the right consistency. So in order to do that, just turn your heat up a little bit until it's simmering, not at the full rolling boiler where a lot of bubbles are coming out, but just that little simmer, and let that cook for a good 5-10 minutes, and that will start to bring down the volume of water. So the second suggestion I'd have for if something's too watery is to add a thickener. So the first idea around that is to add cornstarch. If you take this cornstarch and add a tablespoon or 2 to just a little bit of water, say like a ½ teaspoon to a teaspoon of water, and you mix it together, make a little slurry, and then add that into your sauce or your soup and bring it to a slow simmer or a boil. It has to come to a boil in order to activate it. But once you do that and stir it and whisk it for a little bit, it'll start to thicken up a little bit so it's not so watery. The other thickener I would suggest is flour. So take a little bit of flour and then melt some butter in a pan and add the flour to it, and that will create a little bit of a paste. It's called a roux. And then what you do after you make that paste is add your sauce back into it and whisk it really slowly to get the lumps out. So that's gonna help thicken up your sauce and make it a little less watery and not so bland. So then the third common mistake is that you've made something too spicy. Say you've added too many chilies, too much pepper, too much cayenne to something, and now your mouth is on fire. And if you like that, cheers to you, I see you. And if you want it to be a little bit cooler, I've got a couple ideas. So the first idea I have is to add some fat to it. So things like butter, olive oil, cream. The fat will actually mellow out that spiciness on the tongue and kind of coat the tongue so that the spiciness doesn't bother you so much. The second suggestion I have is to pair that food with a cooling agent. And that cooling agent is often in a fat form as well. So things like sour cream, a whole yogurt, or a heavy cream on the side would really help with that. So what I mean by that is, say you have your sauce, you're all done, you serve it, and then serve it with some yogurt on the side. And as you're eating that, you're eating the cooling agent on the side with it. And that's also gonna mellow it down in your mouth and cool it down in your mouth. Okay, so there you have it. 3 common mistakes in the kitchen and a bunch of tips on how to pivot those and shift them so that you don't have to throw out your dinner. So earlier in the video, I promised some links for some easy weeknight meals. So you can find those up here. These are a couple of my favorite cooks and online recipes to make your weeknights a little bit smoother, a little more streamlined, no more than 30 minutes to make a dinner. So if this video is helpful for you, I'd encourage you to take the next step, which is to listen to my free private podcast, Cooking with Clarity, where I go over 4 common barriers that keep people out of the kitchen and how to overcome them so that you feel more confident when you're cooking. You can find those on my website, inthekitchenwithkristen.com, and I also have a link down below in the description. All right, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.